Okay, I'll get one.
My name is Steve Seninger, and I welcome you here, and glad to see such a big crowd of people who want to find out what's going on about this proposed ski resort. Basically, a couple of comments before we get into some of the first points, and that is the work I do as an economist is specializing in economic development and community change. And as I come into this group and look at what is being proposed in terms of a ski area, I come into it as not only a professional economist, but also as a hiker, a backpacker, a skier, a paddler, a birder, and probably a couple of other labels, most of which are pretty polite. And that's really my involvement in terms of my feelings about Lolo Peak. In terms of the economic development impacts, of course, that's where I really want to take a very close look. Now, 2 points. First of all the information I'm presenting tonight has sources, and they're documented on our website. If you go to lolopk.com, we have the sources listed. .org, sorry. Very important distinction. All the sources are listed, so you can go to that to find out where this information came from. The second point, and this is a broader point, is that the project we're looking at is really a scale that needs to be appreciated. It is a proposed resort real estate development that will be the largest and the most massive in North America. And I mean, reading from the website for the project, basically it would be rivaled, and this is in their words, it would be rivaled only by Vail, Snowmass, and Aspen in Colorado, Baldy Mountain at Ketchum, Idaho, Jackson Mountain at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Mineral King in California, and Whistler Mountain in British Columbia. So this is not a local ski area, it is a massive resort real estate development. And to get into that in terms of the economic impact, first what I'd like to do is take a look at, if I can point this in the right direction and do the right clicker, to look at what public lands represent as they currently exist in the Missoula and Bitterroot valleys. All of this is good news. Good news doesn't last forever. We do know that we need to keep our eye on the economic ball. We can never let slip the fact that economic growth is important. We can't get too complacent about it. But certainly we have had strong growth in the recent past and can expect to see it in the immediate future. Now, one aspect of the Bitterroot Resort proposal, of course, involves the public lands up toward Lolo Peak. And that brings up the important question, well, how do these public lands, particularly the wild land around an area like Lolo Peak, fit into this overall economic development and economic growth performance that I just described? And essentially, when you look at undeveloped lands such as Lolo Peak as an example, economists have come to view that kind of land as a high economic value asset. It's a quality of life asset in a region's economic base, and basically it's one of the magnets that's attracting more health and professional business service jobs. A recent study done on all counties, rural counties in the West, fancy statistical analysis, etc., identified the fact that when you look at income growth and employment growth, particularly in counties such as Missoula and Ravalli, one of the major contributing factors, a high correlation, good explanatory power, etc., is the presence of wild public lands. So it clearly plays a role. And I just want to clarify when I talk about public lands and the role it plays is that this is a perspective that's sometimes referred to as amenity-based development. And that's not really the same as tourism development. Amenity-based development is where we see higher quality jobs coming into a region because of the role of this asset along with other favorable attributes of the communities and the landscape. And that's very different than tourism development which is really more in terms of low-wage jobs, particularly service jobs. Now, on to, in fact, the Bitterroot Resort. And basically, I guess we all know enough about it. I don't have to really outline the proposal. At least I would think most people here tonight have a pretty good feel for what the whole thing is involving in terms of the land up in the public area. It is important to keep in mind that we are talking about a big-time project. The numbers that have been put out there as an economic development proposal are hundreds of millions of dollars on construction. It's a big-time project. In fact, it's being billed on their website as a project that will rival Aspen, it will rival Vail, Whistler, other major league resorts around North America, particularly in western U.S. So it's a very big project. It's big money, wherever it's going to come from, and it's not clear yet where that will all be coming from. And it will, of course, be some kind of corporate entity at some point that's going to be driving this thing. So as we look at this resort proposal, the question comes, how will this resort, given what I just described has been going on in our economies, contribute to economic development? And that brings up questions like, well, what kinds of jobs are we talking about? Who would get the jobs? And basically, what I can do as an economist is look around at other resort economies in the Rocky Mountain West and see what's going on there. Get a sense of what kinds of jobs are being generated at those resorts, in those communities and counties, and try and infer or figure out from that what might happen here in Missoula, Ravalli area. So basically, when you look at the data, and I'll show a slide on this in a moment, a lot of the jobs that are associated with resort real estate developments in the West are basically low-wage and low-skilled jobs. A lot of them are part-time, part-year, and a lot of them do not have health insurance. It's also important to recognize when you look at the local labor markets where these jobs are occurring that many of the jobs are really taken up by workers from outside the local area. So it's an important qualification in terms of jobs. Jobs are good, but then we have to look behind that and see exactly what that involves in terms of wages, benefits, who gets the jobs, etc. The Colorado Department of Labor conducts job vacancy surveys all the time in the Northwest counties, which they call their resort counties, and they do it every year. This is the most recent data, 2003. It shows basically a breakdown of all the vacancies, the more than 2,000 vacancy or job vacancies in that region, and 60% of those jobs are low-wage, low-skilled jobs, like food prep serving, driving, loading, office clerking, cleaning, and maintenance. So again, from looking at the data outside and trying to see how we would go here, one gets the picture that it would be low-wage, low-skilled jobs. And what does that mean in terms of wage levels here in western Montana? This picture gives us Montana Department of Labor and Industry numbers, and it shows it for 2003 by occupational category. I'm kind of getting faded out up here on the wood border, but basically, food prep serving, the average wage is $7.55 an hour. Office clerking is $7.35. Driving, loading is $10. And cleaning maintenance is, if I can read over that board, it's $8.65 an hour. So taking those jobs, translating them into our local labor market, these are the kinds of wages we can expect to see for those jobs here in the Bitterroot and Missoula Valley areas with the resort real estate project. Another major kind of impact at the community level is what happens in terms of housing costs. What are the housing cost impacts from resort real estate projects? And these are clearly real estate projects. I mean, it's not so much a ski resort as it is a real estate project and development with the ski resort being put on as an additional amenity to sell the real estate. You look around at the data and it comes from a variety of sources and a number of locations. We're looking at second homes for out-of-state owners at $600,000 and up. We take some local data from Whitefish, for example, where lots, in quotation marks, that's a presumably small piece of land, is $350,000 and up, and then more recent data from Jackson, Wyoming, with the average price of a single-family dwelling around $615,000. So the numbers are big, And to some extent, they attest to the success of these resorts in terms of their real estate operations. Now, it turns out that those kinds of housing prices have an impact on housing not only at the resort but also in the surrounding area. And what I've done here is I've taken recent data for what I think are ski towns similar to our towns. If you take Jackson, Steamboat, and Whitefish, these are all towns that existed before they became big-time ski resort real estate developments. And what this picture shows are the housing cost levels for those communities on the left compared to Hamilton, on the right compared to Missoula. And basically, if we take Steamboat, Colorado, Jackson, Wyoming, and Whitefish, Montana, for Hamilton, when we compare the housing cost levels in Jackson to Hamilton, it's 60% higher. When we compare the housing cost levels, the housing cost levels in Steamboat to Hamilton, it's 60% higher. When we compare Jackson to Hamilton, that's 47% higher. And when we compare Whitefish here in our own state of Montana to Hamilton, they're 23% higher. Same kind of comparisons against Missoula to get some sense of what does happen to housing costs compared to what we're used to around here. Steamboat's 65% higher than Missoula, Jackson's 52% higher, and Whitefish is 28% higher. So clearly housing costs are higher. Now, one of the claims of the proposed Bitterroot resort is that it will rival Vail, Aspen, and other big-time resorts in North America, particularly in the western U.S. And so I look at the data, taking that at face value, that they're going to be like a Vail or an Aspen or something like that. And we look at the housing cost data collected there, in this case by the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, which is a group of county governments that come together to kind of keep track of what's going on and the issues about housing, the issues about social services for workers, and a lot of other things. And basically this gives you some idea of what those costs look like in those communities compared to a national average. And what this picture shows is the percent by which housing costs in those resort communities are above a national average. 247% for Vail, above the national, 683% for Aspen, 163% for Breckenridge. Their property tax impacts, obviously, from this kind of housing cost inflation, higher housing prices and rising land prices translate by simple arithmetic into higher property tax bills and payments. And when we go beyond just the property tax impact, what are some of the other impacts? Most of the resort communities from which these data come from and the housing cost figures are such that workers don't live near there. They have to commute longer distances to get to work, which has traffic implications. It also has implications when we look at our local community about our kids and our grandkids, and we think about whether they're going to be able to find a job which is going to give them a decent living in terms of wages and also allow them to afford a house. And as we look at the kinds of jobs with this resort proposal, they're not going to contribute to that goal. And basically, as we look at resort real estate developments, these are not for families, obviously, which we usually think of as communities where we have kids and we go to support the local schools and businesses and participate in community activities in local churches. There's also some potential impacts beyond what I've described, beyond jobs, beyond housing costs, beyond property tax, roads, freeways, bypass roads. I know there's an idea that somehow in the morning that there's not going to be much traffic this way, but when you look at what could go on in a resort development as one goes around the country, when you look at the resorts out of the Salt Lake Valley, when you look at the resorts in Colorado, there are all kinds of road impact implications, which in our local area could very well mean bypass roads through rural residential areas such as Target Range, Lolo Community, Bitterroot Valley. And then I mentioned earlier that many of the jobs don't really have benefits or health insurance, and we find in many of these resort economies for the areas away from them where the workers live, that in fact those areas and those governments or counties, then have to pick up the tab for social services. And this has been documented in a number of studies about what the economy of a resort town is like in a resort area. So that's kind of an infrastructure impact too that we have to think about. How do these resort impacts add up? Well, clearly we're looking at resort and construction jobs, some of them for locals, not guaranteed given the way local labor markets work. Big projects attract workers coming in. There will be higher profits for realtors and developers. And what I do is look at this as an equation. As a development economist, what are the positives and then what are the negatives? And as I look at the other side of that equation, we do have the fact of low-wage jobs, part-time seasonal employment, higher housing costs, higher taxes, more congestion, and I really haven't mentioned this very much, but giving up Lolo Peak, which would be given up largely to a lot of out-of-state second home owners. And that adds up to a questionable economic deal. In my mind, as a professional economist who has looked at economic development, consulted with communities and corporations on the issue, it just doesn't add up in my mind to the best economic deal, and it strikes me that this may be a decline in our quality of life. And when that happens, when we turn the corner on that, that's a one-way deal. You don't really get to go back. The Lolo Peak area, I'm a hiker, a paddler. I do all that kind of stuff. It's one of the reasons I live here. It's one of the reasons I love this area. And when we look at the Lolo Peak, an area that I go into all the time in the summer, occasionally in the winter, we're basically looking at industrialization of our public lands. And again, that's irreversible. You do that, and you've got towers, lifts, roads, restaurants, support buildings. You don't take those away at some point in the future. They're there forever. And that changes our view of our mountain, and it's all of ours in the Bitterroot and the Missoula Valley. And I think it's a loss of land to what a lot of us like to do, whether we just look at it, hunt, fish, or hike. That's a lot of economics, and I hope I've provided another perspective to the economic picture. And I would just like to, I like this quote so much. What does it represent when you go beyond the economics? And this is from our Governor Schweitzer. People all over Montana know that the treasure is the mountains, is the rivers, is the open vistas. The treasure of Montana is Montana itself. And I think that sort of speaks beyond the economics of it all. I thank you for your attention. I know we're going to have some questions later on, but I think somebody else is now next up in line.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm John Vorey. I'm the local wildlife biologist here with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And I guess with Steve's permission, I'm going to steal your box here. Is that all right? It's a nice box. I like that box.
For you, I got to make a special price.
Oh, good deal. Put it on the bill. So this way we can get my pictures up there where everybody can see them, hopefully. And we'll kind of get things focused and arranged here. There we go. What I'm going to do is not talk so much. Boy, this box, I don't know. I didn't get such a good deal. It's kind of tilted there, isn't it? There we go. And we'll tilt that thing up a little bit more. There, great. I'm probably not going to talk too much about the impacts, the possible impacts of this proposed development on wildlife. But what I would like to touch on, and what I can deal with a little bit at this point in time, is the wildlife resources that we have there on site right now. And those, of course, are the resources that there's a possibility of them being impacted. And so first off, I would like to talk a little bit about elk. That is one of the major resources as far as wildlife are concerned that many of us here enjoy, whether you're a hunter or not. And as you know, we are blessed here in the Bitterroot Valley with very healthy and abundant wildlife resources, including elk. So what I thought I'd do is kind of run you through a little bit the kind of data that I collect. Starting this time of year, in fact, I just completed my second day of the annual elk census, and it usually takes about a month, but I'll just run you through a little bit of how I collect that data and what it looks like, and then we'll take a look at where the proposed resort would be in relationship to the resources that we have out there. This, on the map on the right here is, of course, the beautiful Bitterroot Valley. And up here in the north, this is Missoula, Lolo, Stevie, Hamilton, Darby. And what I thought I'd do is just take you through a 1 day's flight, go out in a fixed-wing aircraft, and we start before daylight so that we get to where we're going to be to count elk right at daylight. And there you can see we leave the Hamilton Airport, go up, and this day we happen to go up Lolo Creek, and we did a little bit coming down the Bitterroot Valley there. And then every time I find an elk or a group of elk, I use a GPS here, and I mark that group of elk. That happens to be the groups of elk that I saw on that particular day. Well, that was on April 26th. Well, if we combine all of those together for the whole flight of 2002, that's about 25 days worth of flying in the morning. You can see that is where I saw elk in 2002, the spring of 2002. And each of these then has associated with what I saw. Like that group of elk right there was 74 elk. There was 63 cows, 20 calves, and a bull. And like that one right there, that was 49 elk right there. Anyway, so that's 2002. Now, I've done this since 2002. And keep in mind, this is springtime. This isn't where they are in the fall. This is not going to help you get your elk. That costs extra. There's 2002, and what I want to do is kind of let you see where elk are distributed here in the Bitterroot Valley. There's 2002. Let's put 2003 on there. You can start to see some patterns being formed there. Put 2004 on there. As I said, I just started with 2005. But you can see where, we have areas where elk tend to favor. Here's one up Lolo Creek. Here's one around here. Likewise on down. Let's take a little bit closer view in. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit on what we have here. So we go from, say, Stevie north and get us a little bit closer, and you can see where we're talking about where elk are in different places. Now what I would like to do is I'll put where McClay's private property is up there right now, and you can see that this group of elk, which by the way is the most important elk winter range north of Hamilton on the west side of the valley. So you can see where Mr. McClay's property lies and where part of this proposed resort development would occur. I want to take now and move in a little bit closer to that, and we'll overlay some other things on here. So we're going to zoom in a little bit closer now. We're coming down a little further in the airplane. Can't quite see individual elk yet there, though. There's a couple bulls right up there, though. If we take then and draw a polygon, kind of a home range polygon, of course, now this is where I saw elk on an individual day for 3 years in a row. Elk, as you know, are mobile and they can get around. If you spent any time in the hills trying to chase an elk, you know that they can get around. So just because that's where an elk was seen on that day doesn't mean that's the only important area to an elk. So I would like to overlay then a little area here that as far as this particular winter range is concerned, in my experience, this is some of the most heavily used portions of it. Now also take and put on here some of my renditions of where the proposed village would be, and also the proposed housing, and the proposed golf course, and then proposed roads. So you can see that one of the major concerns Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has, of course, in this particular proposal is impacts on the elk winter range. And when you think elk, also attach onto that mule deer. This is also used by mule deer, not to the extent currently that it is by elk, but it's important elk and mule deer winter range. Also attendant and along with that, it's important fall and spring range for both of these species. And of course, when you start to think spring, then we start to think about this time of year, and of course, coming up would be June, right around June 1st, of course. Any of you that know anything about elk and deer know that that is calving and fawning time. So this is also important calving and fawning habitat in here. And so the impacts on those could be considerable. I want to stress also that the impacts are not only the footprint of the development. Now that might be just the footprint of development right there. But the impacts of development can extend far beyond that. I'm talking about people just out enjoying the countryside, going for walks. A major problem is dogs at large. And unfortunately, we can have covenants and all kinds of things, but we do have dogs at large. Whenever you have people and people have dogs at large. And that can cause problems with big game, especially when it comes to that calving and fawning time. We have research done up in northwest Montana concerning white-tailed deer, where we'd put remote cameras out there to try to capture the movements of deer, radio-collared deer. But we also captured dogs chasing deer, and the same dogs, a mile and a half apart on the same day, 2.5 miles from the nearest residence. And so dogs and other livestock and stuff, but dogs in particular, can range quite a ways away and cause quite a bit of problems with disturbing wildlife on winter range. Now, as you know, winter range is important not only because it's an area where they can get nutrition, but it's an area where big game, elk and deer, are restricted to because of snow in the higher country. What elk and deer need is acreage, is square footage to be on, to be there in the wintertime. That's what's important. They have evolved, their metabolism is such that they've evolved to get by on very little forage, so forage quality isn't as important a consideration to Fish, Wildlife, and Parks as is just the acreage for a place for them to be on. Currently, this area is used by about 130 elk. But when I think about wildlife habitat, elk and deer habitat, what I think about is the habitat and its potential to hold, in this case, deer and elk. We have areas in the Bitterroot Valley which are still below their potential, but are about 5 times the density of elk that are here. And so the potential for this area would be, if there weren't any other considerations, such as conflict with the landowners and that kind of thing, the potential would be 500 or 600 elk, or possibly more. We don't know what that upper limit might be, but it's certainly that upper limit would be compromised were there a development such as this to take place. Indeed, elk numbers all over southwest Montana and in other states where elk are found, they're limited not so much by the ecological carrying capacity of their range, but by the economic or human social carrying capacity of their range. And those are some of the things that we run into all the time here, because we do have people trying to make a living on the land out there, and we need to keep them in mind. And we also have people that enjoy elk for hunting or for viewing and want to have them around, so we do try to strike a balance. But in this case, we have focused harvest in this area over the past several years because of concerns by area ranchers, Mr. McClay being one of them, about the impacts of elk on his rangeland and on his hay crops, etc. there. So I did mention that the impacts can be much further than just the footprint on there. But one of the other impacts that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is concerned about is not only the loss to elk as far as a place for them to be during an important part of the year, but also our ability to manage them. Obviously, one of the most important management tools for elk and deer, of course, is hunting. And if we have a subdivision, obviously we're probably not going to have too much hunting going on in a subdivision there. And so what happens in cases like this, and it's happened in other places here in the Bitterroot, is that the elk transforms, if you will, from being a benefit to the citizens of the valley to a liability to the citizens of the valley. Because then we get a call, we have to go in there and somehow try to remove or deal with elk that are eating bushes, getting into people's yards, threatening people's dogs, threatening people. I mean, we run into that in places like Banff National Park, Yellowstone National Park, Gardner. We get into conflicts like that. And when we talk about those kinds of conflicts, where we have wildlife coming in conflict with people, then another one that we need to consider here, or another couple anyway that we need to consider, are of course bears and mountain lions. Now, nobody probably wants a bear or a mountain lion in their backyard, including people that would live in this proposed subdivision. And so what happens is if we do get deer and elk attracted to a place or harbored in a place like that where there's no management, that we can't exercise any management, then they in turn attract, say, a mountain lion, for example, then we also get a call to go remove a mountain lion or a bear in the case in the summer. So there's that aspect too. Not only the natural features on the landscape being taken away or usurped from the animal's use, but once it is usurped, if an animal comes in there, there's a whole different management scenario that kicks into view or kicks into place, and we have to run in and deal with it in that way. So there are other species in the area that are of concern, and I'll speak a little bit to those right now. Get this up here. Those are Canada geese. The impacts of this subdevelopment on Canada geese probably wouldn't be too much. We're not too worried about that. But this is an overlay of wolverine habitat. This is wolverine habitat, by the way. Wolverine is one of the species that is on Montana's list of species of concern. Wolverine is on that. Wolverine is a threatened species, excuse me, it's not. It's on the species of concern, as is lynx. This is also a gray wolf habitat, and it is also potential grizzly bear habitat. We don't know currently of any grizzly bear use there, but it is certainly grizzly bear habitat, and so any analysis of the impacts of this proposal on those species would certainly have to be analyzed. But wolverine, the upper portions here, this kind of pale blue area here is, I got this from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but this is the area that is wolverine habitat, and this is the proposal here, the ski run proposal. In addition to a potential expansion out into this area, and the light green area is the proposed Nordic ski area here. So that is another species that there's a potential for them to be impacted there. Also, Canada lynx is another species that we know this is Canada lynx habitat, and of course they would potentially be impacted, so we'd have to take a pretty close look at that. But just a quick overlay to show you that this is indeed an occupied Canada lynx habitat there. So that's kind of a real short synopsis of things right now. I guess I won't go any longer than that. Is there another speaker that we're going to have now then? Okay.
I'm Andy Kula from the Missoula Ranger District, and what I'd like to talk to you about a little bit today is probably a couple things in relation to this proposal. And the first thing I'd like to explain a little bit is our process and how the Forest Service responds to a proposal like this and kind of the steps and that sort of stuff. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about where we're at exactly in the process right now, so you can kind of put it in perspective that way. We see this as a special use proposal, and it's dealt with in our 2700 manual and procedures, and it's also described in CFR 251.54, which are the Code of Federal Regulations. And when we receive a proposal like this, there's a few steps. There's two initial steps that we call screening. And the first step that it goes through is we discuss with the proponent, we meet with the proponent, we talk about what the proponent is looking at, and we exchange technical information to the point where we can screen it by what we call initial level screening, or initial screening, okay? And under initial screening, there's 9 criteria that we weigh or we screen or we examine the proposal against. And those 9 criteria are things such as consistency with law, regulations, and orders. Second one is consistency, or if it can be made consistent with the forest plans. The third one is whether or not it poses a serious risk to public health or safety. The fourth one is whether it creates an exclusive or perpetual right of occupancy or use of the land. The fifth one is whether or not it would interfere with the administrative uses of the Forest Service or other previously or existing authorized uses in National Forest land. The sixth one is whether the proponent has any delinquent debt under a prior authorization, a delinquent debt to the Forest Service under a prior authorization. The seventh one is whether it involves gambling, sexually oriented commercial services. The eighth one is whether it involves private military or paramilitary training or exercises. And the ninth one is whether it involves the disposal of solid waste or radioactive or other hazardous substances. And those 9 criteria make up what we call initial level screening. And that's the first thing that we look at, first set of things that we look at. If a proposal passes initial screening and those 9 criteria, then it moves to second level screening. And in second level screening, we determine if there's a competitive interest. In other words, is there anybody else who would be interested in providing this type of service? We look at whether it is in the public interest. We look at whether the proponent can demonstrate financial and the technical capability to do the proposal. And then finally, we look at whether the proposal has technical and economic feasibility. And then if the proposal passes a second level screening, then the Forest Service can formally accept it as an application. And prior to this point, it's considered a proposal. In the case of what we have here, we're at the initial proposal. But I'll go into that a little bit more. If it passes first and second level screening, that's when a proposal becomes formally, quote, an application, and that's when the NEPA process begins. And the NEPA process is the National Environmental Policy Act, and that's the time at which we would initiate an environmental impact statement or an environmental assessment, and the level of environmental analysis would be determined by the magnitude of the proposal, the issues related to the proposal, and those sorts of things like that. So a lot of the resource things that folks have been talking about, that we're talking about, really come a lot farther into the process after initial screening and after second level screening. So where are we at on this right now? Well, we started talking to Mr. McClay in early 2003. He came in and visited with us about some ideas for use in national forest involving summer and winter recreation. And through this series of, it's kind of a repetitive process where we talk back and forth and ask for information, exchange ideas and all, the proposal kind of starts to develop. And at each stage, we explain to Mr. McClay that based on the information we have, this is what the indications look like in relation to initial screening. In addition to that, we give him copies of CFR 251.54 and the 2709 rules that show initial and second level screening so that he can understand the process too. So we've been going through this iterative process with him since about 2003, and he gave us what was called a pre-application in April of 2003. And the pre-application was similar, but not exactly like what is being proposed right now. And we responded to him in February of 2003 that based on the information we had on that pre-application, we didn't feel that it would meet the initial screening criteria. And whenever you have a proposal that doesn't meet the initial screening criteria, what the term is that it receives no further consideration. And then it's returned to the proponent who then can modify and work on and develop the proposal in hopes of meeting the screening criteria. Then after that, we talked to him some more. He offered more ideas and oral proposals. And in February of, in December of 2004, Bitterroot Resort had what was, I think, referred to as the rollout, where they had a lot more technical information, a lot more detailed information. They did some public hearings. They came in and made a presentation to us with some maps and some stuff. Said, here's more specifically what we're looking at, and there was a lot more detail to that. After the December rollout, we got back with Bitterroot Resort and said, okay, we see what you're doing here, but we need certain technical information so that we can look at it in relation to the initial screening criteria. And they provided that technical information to us in February of this year, and it had information on numbers of runs, acres of runs, what management areas the proposal was in, numbers of lifts, support facilities, possible roads, and basically more technical information there. And so we took a look at that and then reviewed that, and then last week the forest supervisor sent another letter to Mr. McClay and then advised him that based on the information, the technical information we got from the December rollout, which had the detailed information, that the proposal still did not meet the initial screening criteria. And the specific criteria in the initial level that were cited were incompatibility with the Bitterroot and the Lolo forest plans. And the specific aspects of that were there were runs and a lift proposed in what we call Management Area 6 on the Lolo Forest. And Management Area 6 is research natural areas. There's a roughly 920 acre research natural area located immediately to the west of Mr. McClay's property. That's kind of a set-aside area with special scientific and natural significance, and which scientists are studying alpine larch, western larch, and the hybridization of the two. It's a real interesting area. There's also some real old big whitebark pine there, but that RNA is called the Carlton Ridge Research Natural Area, and it's set up for alpine larch, western larch hybridization studies. There's some trees up there that are like 500 to 700 years old. There's some that are actually up there that are reported by scientists to be 1,000 years old. It's like, whoa, that's a pretty old tree. So research natural areas are set up according to our regulations in perpetuity, and only catastrophic circumstances that significantly alter the conditions for which the research natural area was originally created are the basis for changing, moving, or altering a research natural area. And that research natural area was established. The establishment efforts started in the 70s and took quite a while, and then they were completed, and it was officially established in 1987. So there's been work done since that time. The other item in the initial level screening was Bitterroot Management Area 5. And Bitterroot Management Area 5 is a management area that's designated for semi-primitive recreation. And semi-primitive recreation does not allow developed facilities such as lifts or ski runs or roads. Another forest plan issue was Lolo National Forest Management Area 11, which is roadless. And Management Area 11 is managed, of course, for roadless characteristics. So developed recreation that a ski area isn't compatible with Management Area 11. Likewise, Management Area 11 has a visual quality objective of retention, which means that alterations on the landscape cannot change the look, make it look less natural. Retention means it kind of keeps looking like it is in a wild and undeveloped condition. There's also part of the proposal that dealt with cross-country skiing, but the preliminary technical information that we received on the cross-country skiing, there wasn't enough technical information or detail there for us to make a call whether or not it met the initial screening criteria. So in our response to Mr. McClay, we said we need more technical information before we can make that determination. So where we're at right now is like I said, if a proposal doesn't meet initial or second level screening, the technical term is it receives no further consideration, but the proponent has the opportunity to modify the proposal in hopes of meeting the screening criteria. The end.
We'll go ahead and have the full panel up here and entertain questions. I'll try to keep it organized by recognizing folks. Yes, sir.
I've got a question for the Forest Service. When looking at Mr. McClay's proposal, It's our understanding that he wants to pump water out of Upper Carlton Lake and Carlton Lake. And it's my understanding that Upper Carlton Lake is in wilderness, Lower Carlton Lake is in, I guess, wilderness or wilderness study. Was that part of your review? Do I have my facts right to begin with, I guess?
Well, there's Carlton Lake and there's McLean Lake. Is that what you're referring to as lower?
No, there's Lower Carlton Lake, and then there's a lake that's being referred to as Upper Carlton.
Yeah, I was just looking at the map and I was seeing Carlton Lake and McLean Lake, but they're both actually on the Bitterroot. And the main Carlton Lake, I think, is just on the edge of the wilderness. However, aside from that, not being as familiar with those lakes as I should be, none of those come into consideration at initial or second level screening. The use of the water or pumping out of there or anything like that. That's farther down. First of all, the water rights are a state issue. The Forest Service doesn't authorize or modify or manage water rights. And then, effect on the hydrology, for example, it might come from pumping the water out of it and changing the water table and all. That would come at the NEPA stage when you're in an EIS, which would be after initial, after second level, down the road quite a ways. So at this point, no.
And this question's for you as well. I was wondering, with the new forest plan rules and the current administration, they're sort of changing the way forest plans are introduced or formed or brought through. And I was wondering how those changes to the public comment periods and processes and how you would validate a proposal, how that would affect.
Good question. She wants to know, you want to repeat it or you want me to say what I think you said? Her question dealt with the forest plan, and there is a change going on in the forest plan regulations right now, and several things are going on. She wanted to know if the new forest planning regulations would affect how the public can comment on a proposal like this and the forest plan, and how that would change in relation to the old forest plan.
And also specifically on this proposal,
Okay.
if it would move through any differently.
Okay, if it would move through any differently under the new regs. The proponent asked us to consider an amendment to our existing forest plan, and what we replied to him with the forest supervisor said is that since we're in the forest plan revision process right now, the Lolo and the Bitterroot are revising their forest plans, and our plan is to have the new forest plans out in 2006. So we said that because we are in the process of revising the plan right now, we were not going to entertain a forest plan management area amendment, particularly for a project of this scale, because you're changing it and it would just it's just like too much. There's too much going on, too many moving parts at the time. And we are already probably better than halfway through our new forest plan development. So we said no, we would look at it. We would look at it again if they wanted to after the new forest plan was out, which will have new, we call them management areas in our old forest plan. I don't know if they're going to be called management areas in the new one, but they're going to be like management areas. In terms of how you would want to comment on this in the new forest plan, the way it would work is I think it's later this year, we're going to come out with a draft or a proposed, I think they're going to call it a preferred option. And that option will show what we used to call management areas, which will probably have a new name, maybe. But it'll have a management area assigned to this area that would say whether it was still in roadless, for example, or if it was in a developed recreation area or developed recreation management area or whatever, okay? So that preferred option will come out. And when that comes out, there'll be a public comment period, and we'll actually have collaborative meetings in the community like we've done with the other one. And the public can comment on what they think of those management areas and how that would relate to a proposal such as this. So that would be the next opportunity to do it.
Does the local forest supervisor, is that who has the final say in this? Is this the Lolo or the Bitterroot?
Well, it's actually on both forests. So our forest supervisor on the Lolo, Debbie Austin, is working closely with the forest supervisor on the Bitterroot, Dave Bull, on this. We coordinate and talk regularly on it because the proposal, as in the rollout and as per the technical information that the proponent has given us, is on both forests.
But the final decision rests with those gentlemen?
One gentleman and one woman.
Yes, what the supervisor should say.
Yes. Yes, a permit for a ski area like this is under the authority of the forest supervisors.
Just a follow-up question to the front row. Is there any sunset rule on modifying and resubmitting, or could it go on forever? You just said that you were able to say, not now, we've got to do this other thing first. But is there any way to...
Well, what we said was that, we're under the 1986 Lolo Forest Plan, and we said, and that's what's in force right now, and we said it doesn't comply with that. And we said that we're not willing to amend that because we're right in the revision process, okay? But after we get through the revision process, and even now, Mr. McClay has the latitude to modify the proposal, resubmit it, and we would initial screen it again.
And there is no end to that process?
Well, no. Although, the way the MA6 and the MA11 now set, it's a lot of the high elevation country, and it would be difficult, I think, to propose something. To develop something without using that country.
I'm just thinking of closure one way or the other for a community. So, for instance, one of your criteria is the public interest. Now, do you determine the public interest, or could a public voice express the public interest?
Public voice would determine the public interest. Some other things you might look at in the public interest would be a needs assessment, would be the supply of skier days on a local, regional, and national basis. There'd be a lot of different, dimensions to that. But people expressing their opinion is huge. That's very important.
So, for instance, were there to be a referendum in Lolo and Missoula on the resort?
That would certainly influence the decision makers, and they would certainly take that into account.
And it might go on or off, but bring an end to the resubmission process. You might do it or not.
Well, if there was a referendum, the forest supervisors would consider that. But again, a proponent, anybody can propose and repropose and repropose and repropose. We can never say, you can't ask anymore. We try to be kind of, nice and fair. We try to. Free country and all that stuff.
My question is for the biologist. From your map that you had up there, it appears that almost all of that wintering area where you've seen how are on the place private property. And he's already cut runs for what could be a little mom and pop run. There's nothing really that could, is there anything that could affect whether he builds this golf course and subdivides that whole ranch and still affects your wintering area for the elk? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question, because regardless of if there's a ski area involved, if the area becomes developed, the impacts to the elk are the same. So he could opt, even if the ski runs aren't in the picture, he could opt to develop his property. But there are other options if he opts to do that. I hope that we could work with Mr. McClay and his developers to try to minimize the impact to elk and to wintering big game there. One of the options would be to move the developments from where you saw them in the slides that I showed, to move them down a little bit further. It wouldn't totally ameliorate them, but it would minimize them.
Do you see most of the impact right there in the wintering area as in regard to the rest of the national forest that he wants to develop? Is it more?
The major impact is on that winter and spring and calving and fawning area, yes. There certainly would be other impacts on other seasonal ranges like summer range and stuff. There would be impacts there, some that could be positive even, if it could produce better forage, for example, in an open area, something like that. But the major impacts concerned about are the ones on winter range, because that's a limiting range for deer and elk.
Yeah, John, I know Tom McLean and his dad were on the block management program, and some of my tax dollars as a hunter goes to that. Did they remove themselves from that program?
No, well, one thing is that your tax dollars don't go to that, your license dollars do. No, we don't get any tax dollars, so everybody knows that. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks is totally sportsman's funded. But as far as I know, they're still in that program, in block management, as far as I know.
What would be the impact then if he develops his own property and takes it off the program? Is that his option?
Well, that's his option, yeah. The block management program is totally voluntary on part of the landowner, of course, and my guess is that if there was a large development in there that he would opt out of that. I mean, that's totally up to him, but if that were to be taken out of block management, that would lower hunter opportunity in that area.
Already has because of the Forest Service Law.
Someone's enlightened about that herd of elk that's on his property up there. Probably about 20 years ago, that herd was 300 until Sapphire was built, Kenwood and everything else. Now it's down to about 150.
Yep. Well, and those are some of the possible impacts there. And we have, as you know, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has focused harvest in that area because of conflicts generated between people and wildlife. Anytime you get a development like that, that's one of the consequences, or can be one of the consequences.
I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but I'd like to know what would happen if the proposal was approved, went through, was built, and then went belly up. Who takes care of it then? Who takes down the ski?
Boy, I don't know. It'd be a bunch of empty buildings. I don't know. Yeah, Fred.
That's a very good.
Is this on? Yeah. Good question. I can only address one part of that, and that is the irreversibility issue that I raised when we take a look at changing the landscape for this project in terms of lift towers, roads, support buildings, and all that. I don't think they'd be removed, obviously. I mean, some of it's going to stay there. And that is, to me, one of the most important aspects of this as an economic development proposition, is whether going that way, we as communities will benefit enough for what we're giving up and for what these impacts will do that can never be changed back. So it's not a direct answer, but I just wouldn't see those things going away.
I could talk about it from the Forest Service permit perspective. In the event that the proposal were to meet initial, go through second level screening, and go through NEPA, and then have a permit issued, and then get the financing to actually build it, and go into operation, and then fail, it would be operated under a special use permit, and the special use permits that we issue for ski areas now are typically 40-year permits. They're theoretically revocable permits, but they typically are not ever, they're not revoked. They're, of course, if the operation's going well, they're renewed at the end of the term. If the area were to fail, financially, typically what happens to ski areas is they'll sell, and they'll sell maybe 75 cents on the dollar, 50 cents on the dollar, 10 cents on the dollar, depending on how bad it is, but they'll sell, and a new operator would take it over and give it a go. But from a practical perspective, typically when a ski area is developed, although it's a revocable permit with a term, they're usually there forever.
I think we consider too that, is the industry growing such that we need not a big deal building ski areas in the 60s, early 70s as the industry was climbing, and then through the 80s plateaued. And then I think we kind of declined a little bit. So, we might and nobody will come. Very few.
Well, we do the best that we could in second level screening. There's a needs assessment, and the needs assessment isn't whether they could make money on it or they could populate the runs. It would be whether there's a need for that type of skiing in that area in light of population demographics, in light of the population of the area, in light of the other ski areas that are in the area, in light of transportation systems, in light of a whole myriad of factors that way. So a needs assessment is done as part of the second level screening before you even get to NEPA, which of course is a predecessor to any permitting, to any construction. So that is an important step.
I could just add one thing to that. Talking with Suzanne Miller, who couldn't be here tonight, about some of the points that she was going to cover. She was going to be comparing Jackson, Wyoming to Hamilton and Missoula to get some sense about, given how the changes occurred over there, what does that portend or forecast for us over here? And in one of her slides, which we may get to see sometime in another presentation, she does talk about percentage change in population for Jackson, percentage change in income, and percentage change in skier days. And the percentage change in skier days basically over the past decade has been, it's a bar that just barely makes it above the 0% mark. It's been very flat.
Yeah, with it being a Canadian Lakes habitat, where does the ESA come into play with the permit process?
In the permitting process, that would, if we remember, we have initial level screening, second level screening, and then NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. It would come in the NEPA process when you did the actual site-specific environmental analysis.
So by no means, like I know the new forest plan management that was released in January, it kind of takes out the NEPA process. By no means is that going to affect this?
Oh, all the new planning regs meant is that you don't have to do an EIS for a forest plan. But any site-specific project under a forest plan would require ground level NEPA. Yeah, and that's a good point, is when we did, that's very astute observations, when we did forest plans in 1987, under the old planning regs, you did an environmental impact statement on the forest plan. And under the new planning regs, the decision was made that the real NEPA questions don't occur at the forest planning level, they occur at the site-specific ground level. And so under the new planning regs, you don't have to do an EIS on the forest plan. But projects such as this, projects such as building a trail, projects such as a timber sale, projects such as a recreation project, under the new regs would still require site-specific NEPA, which would be a decision memo, an environmental assessment, or an EIS. And in this case, it would be an EIS. So there'd be a lot of involvement in in-depth analysis there.
It appears that the roadless area and the scientific study area up there should just pretty much make this a done deal to stop this thing in the initial screening process. But today, the Senate voted to allow oil drilling in the Anwar National Refuge in Alaska. What does it take to change the thing perpetually of the roadless area and the scientific area before we can open that up to ski areas?
Well, the forest plan management areas can be amended at the forest supervisor level. The research natural area it was designated at the chief of the Forest Service level, which is above. Washington chief? Yeah, the Washington chief. It was who had the authority to designate the RNA.
Does he have the authority to remove that designation?
Yes.
So those could just be bureaucratic changes made by one individual in the city.
Oh, technically they could, but typically it wouldn't happen in a vacuum. There'd be some discussion, politics, involvement of people. But anything's possible.
Now, what's the going rate for leasing for a ski area?
Well,
is there economic incentive for the Forest Service to say, hey, great?
Oh no, the revenue that the Forest Service gets from permitting ski areas goes back in the Treasury. It doesn't go back to the Forest Service. Unlike the fee demonstration projects, for example, that's a piece of legislation just passed that said, like, for example, fees from campgrounds that we get on the Missoula District, we're allowed to keep a percentage of those fees to manage that campground. With ski areas, the money goes back into the Treasury, so there's no direct financial incentive to the Forest Service.
Okay, well, do you have any idea at this time what the Forest Service would charge, or what the government would charge for leasing?
Well, it's based on a percentage of the revenue that's generated. So on something of this scale, without having the detailed information in terms of number of skiers and number of revenue, that's just too far down the road to speculate.
Okay, thank you.
For the professor, you mentioned low wage jobs. Missoula being a university town, wouldn't this be a great place for students to fill a lot of those jobs and supplement their income?
It's been The question is, would this not be a good opportunity for students in terms of jobs, even if they are low-wage jobs? And that's actually been presented by the research team. From my knowledge of employment conditions in the local labor markets, it's not a real problem right now in terms of students getting jobs. This might be a good opportunity. I don't know. I guess it depends which one of those bars you end up on in my graph, whether it's a $7.35 an hour or the $7.65 an hour or the $8.50 an hour. Wages that really aren't that much above the minimum wage. So it's a question of whether students would think that's enough to pay the expense of driving out here and working and some of those additional costs of having the job.
Can I use the microphone? I have two questions. My name is Bruce Burke. I do the Lolo Peak News, and we're asking for people to write letters to the editor. And I invite you to write your opinions and feelings on this. It's printed once a month, so if you get your material in by the 25th, 26th, then we can probably utilize it. And that would help get the word out. My questions, it's Lolo Peak News, Lolo, Montana. It'll get to me. But it's P.O. Box 1017 if you have a pen. In my last article I wrote that this is the Bitterroot ski resort is a proposal that is very much, what I quote is a real estate lady in a ski resort gown. And I believe with the economics professor that this is a real estate deal and it impacts the whole thing. It's the bottom line. That's where the money is going to be made. And the ski resort is the attraction. My two questions are that one with the Forest Service about when you talk about percentage of profits that you'll receive on the lease, is that only from the ski resort, which is not going to make much money? It's just an attraction. The real estate sales is where the money is, and that has nothing to do with Forest Service. And the second thing is about public input, public opinion. I believe it's the duty of the press and also the Forest Service and the Fish and Game and the whole myriad of people, protectors and stewards of public lands, that's our land. And that's why I really feel that we can't take lightly the fact that public input, public meetings, public concern is number one, way ahead of anything else, because the Forest Service works for us. That's our land. And so I believe that we need to really strengthen that public input part of this. And a lot of people are shaking in their boots about this, of our homes here in Lolo and Florence, and maybe just, to elaborate more so on the public input part, and that some dictator of the Forest Service isn't going to be making all the decisions, but that public input has a bigger impact on that, because that is our land. I hope I didn't bury my two questions, but can you elaborate on that public input? And then, now I forgot the first one. Oh yeah, the real estate. Yeah.
Yeah, if a special use permit were issued for a ski area, the revenue that the federal government got would be only for the ski area. It would not be for any of the shops or real estate or concessions or restaurants or anything on the private land. And then the second part is public opinion plays a big part in this, and the forest supervisors are listening. We're tracking the comments that we get. The kind of different thing is that there's so much interest in this, and yet we're so early in the process. Typically our formal public comment process is set up for NEPA. When there is a proposal and there's a specific information, we ask for comments on that, and then we collect the comments, do a content analysis, we respond to each comment, we address each comment in a certain place in the EIS. But what we've been working with is that like I said, we're so early in the process. We're still at we're at what we call preliminary proposal, early initial screening, and there's not a formal process for the comments that way. But if you have them, send them in to our planning zone website, which I should have with me, but I think I forgot to bring. And we've been tracking, collecting those, circulating them, and the supervisors are reading them.
I guess I have one quick question. Do the comments you receive now count later in the NEPA process, or do you have to comment again?
Well, right now, like I said, it's receiving no further consideration. So the comments we have right now will hold, but we typically wouldn't carry these comments automatically into the NEPA process, although what we would do is we'd collect the people who commented and make sure that they were mailed a solicitation or request to comment if we get to NEPA. It's not a when, it's, there's an if aspect there too.
Let's say that this current winter's snowfall rate is a trend. Is this going to be, has McClay taken this into consideration at all that he's building a ski resort and that we might be in some sort of long global warming trend that will make snow impact or some sort of drought cycle? Has this been, do any of you know if he's taking this into account?
Well, for the Forest Service process, that would come in with feasibility. We'd look at climatic patterns and those sorts of things, at least at a preliminary stage in second level screening, and then in a lot more depth in NEPA. And I can't speak for Mr. McClay, but I'd imagine if he has a lot of stake in this, he's probably pretty attuned to that. David, could you speak to that?
I would speak to that. I'm David Blair. I work for the resort and by surprise there. The folks in Boston that runs over the course of the winter. The small snowfall we got in January kind of hung on those runs, and the reason is that those runs are tilted to the north. And so what we think is that with a foot or 2 feet of man-made snow on those runs, that snow would hold very nicely. And so we were very encouraged by what we saw this winter.
Thank you.
It's my understanding that Mr. McClay currently has a lawsuit pending against the Forest Service in order to get access to the Carlton Lake area. I guess we're making the assumption that access would support snowmaking equipment. I guess my question as far as the Forest Service plan, should Mr. McClay not prevail in that lawsuit, what type of impact would that have on the plan?
Well, I can't speak to the investigation because it's ongoing, number one, and number two, it's going on in the Bitterroot Forest, and I'm on the Lolo, so even if I want to, I don't know anything about it much. So, other than those two things, but regardless of if Mr. McClay had a right to use the road or some kind of pre-existing easement or something, we would look at the special use application if it got past second level screening the same way. I mean, other ski areas typically do not have any easements or pre-existing road rights on the areas that they travel and the maintenance and access roads on a ski area. So I can't see it at this point as being huge. But then again, remember, I'm not really an expert. I mean,
maybe Mr. Blair could talk a little bit about the impact of not being able to make snow in that area.
Oh no, yes, snowmaking is essential. The project doesn't work without snow.
forest plan will be released, what kind of a time frame are we talking about?
I think the preferred option is going to come out this spring or summer for comment, and then the final plans are supposed to be done in 2006, which is like soon.
But you don't have any specific date or timeline or whatever.
Our forest planning team does, and that's another thing I should know, but I don't.
Spring or summer?
Yeah. And that'll be an opportunity to kind of look at, as the way I understand it in the new regs, the preferred option will be like the proposed action. We like the preferred alternative.
Is there any statistical data or historical statistics with regard to how many resorts that are started actually, how many times they change ownership before they're successful?
I'm sure there is.
There must be a doctor's dissertation out there somewhere on it. But I don't know offhand. It is clear when you look at some of the national data and some of the regional market data for skiing and the ski industry that it's pretty much a fixed pie. And so it's a matter of competing for your slice of that fixed pie, which isn't growing. All kinds of studies about what happens to skiers when they get into their 40s and how they don't ski anymore, and the drop off there, and a lot of other ways, I suppose. The fact that they've picked up snowboard, we've picked up I'm a skier, I'm a downhill skier. We've picked up snowboarders, and now we've added that to the market, and that's been there for a while. So it's a fairly flat market that you're competing for a piece of the pie, and you hope to get a bigger wedge.
Well, it just seems like historically, if you look at the ones anywhere in the local area, they've all changed hands at least 3 or 4 times, and maybe before they're successful, if they're considered successful now.
Yeah, I think if you look at the resorts in the local area, they are ski resorts, and they're less so real estate development projects. And when you look at the big time resorts, they are all about real estate. And I'll give you an example. There's a new outfit now up and running down in Idaho called Tamarack, financed by a French billionaire. And they have a certain amount of public land now for their ski runs, and they're working out a land swap to get even more to expand. And it's just up and running, and basically they sold, just in the last couple of months, 134 lots, that's LOTS, lots, which generated $93 million. So, the sums of money on this real estate are enormous. So if you can make that a success, and it's pretty clear that even though the market is fixed pie, you can put that in as an attraction on the real estate. You may not have to worry that much about whether the ski end of it is economically viable if your real estate piece is doing real well.
Well, but even Big Sky had the real estate changed hands at least.
That's true, yeah.
I heard in one statistic that 100% of all large ski areas in North America are eventually sold to large, big ski industry corporations. 100%.
100% of all big ski areas are, basically when you look at the industry, there's the big 3 corporations that run these operations. And these are multi-million-dollar operations with more political power than one would care to think about. And those are viable. At least 2 out of the 3 at the moment are viable in terms of the money they're making. So it's not mom and pop ski resorts. It's big corporate dollars and the political oomph that goes with it.
Does the Forest Service believe that the public that they want that to change, or do they not know?
Well, that's what the planning team is doing right now, and alternatives and the preferred option will be released in spring and summer. So I guess I can't give you a preview. What's the preferred option going to look like? I can't speak to that now.
Once a special use permit is issued, if in the case it ever did get issued, is that property, what's the public access to that property?
One of the conditions of a special use permit is that they're not exclusive rights. So the public can still go up there.
You could walk up the middle of the ski hill?
Well, the land is open, but once a ski area is permitted, they have what's called an annual operating plan. And the annual operating plan has specific provisions on how that area will be managed. And in some cases, like people walking up the ski runs is not allowed in the annual operating plan because it's like dangerous. So people could be restricted for health and safety, for skier patterns and those sorts of things, during the ski season and stuff. But
during the summer, if you wanted to walk right up one of the ski runs, if it was...
Yes, as long as you had access to it. Had access across public land to it.
What would happen to hunting access on the ski runs on public land and the higher reaches? Would hunting be allowed?
Yeah, typically hunting is allowed. There, as is now, there probably would be year-round road closures. Like it is now. I mean, right now there's no roads in Mormon. Yeah, typically you can. You can in the ski areas that we have now.
What if you get a wrong moves?
I appreciate all your input. It's been very good, but I still, how can this private company just take over the public land?
Well, they can't take over the public land. And where we're at in the process now, the proposal wouldn't receive any further consideration unless it was modified. And even if a permit was issued, it would be for a specific purpose during a specific season under specific conditions. But they don't, take it over in terms of...
They put runs on Carlton and Lolo. They wouldn't.
Well, they dominate how it looks. Yeah, they would definitely change the way it looks and change the way it is managed. But I guess, the special use process that the Forest Service has is a method to authorize, individual uses of public land. And other things that are under special use permit, for example, are like electronic sites, are like water lines and pipelines, utility corridors. All these things are other types of special uses, like a ski area is. So how can they do that? Well, it's allowed under the Code of Federal Regulations.
What extent of development can they do, though, if the permits were granted? Because we're talking about an area where part of the ski area is like 7-8 miles from the major developed area. And when you're talking about, they're talking about thousands of skiers per day. And so you're talking about restroom facilities, you're talking about water being available, and needing to be available up in the very highest reaches of this area. How is that handled in terms of development?
Typically in the NEPA process, when you're doing an environmental impact statement, you would take the proposed action, you would take the application as the proposed action, and then you would develop alternatives to that. And if there were certain aspects of the proposal that were incompatible with specific resources, you would either modify the proposal or you would have mitigation in the EIS, is how you would deal with those sorts of things. And if there was, like for example, if, development of a 5-star restaurant on the top of Lolo Peak, for example, was proposed, and that were found to be, for example, in violation of visual quality, soil stability, TES species, then that aspect of the proposal could be denied.
Well, I know part of his public proposal as forward is to build a restaurant right on top of Carlton Ridge. It looks like somewhere around 7,500 to 8,000 foot level. And if you have a large restaurant like that, you're going to have some kind of a sewer system. Correct. And I'm saying that you would also need some kind of sewer facilities at other places. Is there a precedent for that kind of development?
Yeah, yeah, other ski areas have restaurants. Big Mountain has a restaurant up on top on National Forest. Snowball has restrooms on National Forest. Yeah, there's precedent.
I have a question about the relation of the community to the process. It's fine for you all to have your list of technical language, you're very good, and you put it through a process, but for almost everyone in this room, or everyone in Missoula or Lolo, each one of those will have a bunch of decisions of whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. It might be, well, it's okay with me unless it kills snowball. Well, it's okay by me if it attracts more high-paying health professionals to the area than it scares away because they like to ski as well as riding. Or it's okay by me, but they can't use any herbicides on the golf course because that's draining down into the creek. Now, of course, Fish and Game will take up something like that, but at what point in the process do the citizens and the community get to say, here's what makes it worth it or not worth it to me?
Well, like I said, we're always listening to the comments. And, now initial screening, whenever we're listening to what public comments are, what people are saying, or interested in that. But in terms of, specifically, that would probably come in more in the NEPA process, where you would actually categorize each comment specific to an issue, and then address that issue in the analysis. And that would more typically, in the real structured forum, happen in NEPA.
But then at that point in the process, if a community organized its voice, as I mentioned earlier, or referendum or something else, if you had group voices from a community, that also can be entered into the record.
Oh yeah, I mean group voice. We're listening to group voices now. We're listening to interests, that think this is a good idea. We're listening to groups that don't think it's a good idea. I mean, we're all ears, and that's real important to us. I mean, and then I'd encourage you, don't think, oh, I don't have to comment till NEPA. You're as pointed out, your letters and your views that are put forth now are important. We're collecting them, we're looking at them, we're considering them. Speak up and say what you think. It's important, seriously.
I know you're probably, what I want to say is somewhat of authority with the Forest Service, otherwise you wouldn't be here tonight. But I know better than 20 years ago, the McClay family sued the Forest Service because the mountain slipped on a logging project, covered up a couple of switchback roads. The Forest Service did put in a log gate, it was damaged, they moved the gate. Now it has been repositioned. Why would the Forest Service risk going into another agreement with the same type of situation of the unstable soil underneath these clear cuts on public land?
That's something that we would look at in NEPA. If you got the NEPA on a proposal like this, you'd look at the suitability of the soils for the proposed use and whether the soils were stable enough to sustain road construction, support facilities, lift construction, clearing of runs, and those sorts of things. That would be examined in the NEPA process, in the EIS. And then we'd reach for, we'd reach an analytical answer to your question.
In order for us to respond as a citizen for our land, everybody's, are we going to have to address, these specific things in order for it to be considered, or can we just write?
You can say whatever's on your mind and whatever the important issues are to you, and you don't have to structure them by the 9 initial screening criteria, the 5 second level, or anything like that. You say what's on your mind, you say what's important, and speak from your heart.
Well, I can do that easily, but I'm not sure that will fit into any kind of category that.
Oh yeah, we're great at categorizing comments. we can take what seems like the most left brain, eloquent, artistic comment, and we can put it in a box and analyze it. We do that. I beg your pardon?
If it's not eloquent or artistic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, don't worry about how you structure a comment or if it, addresses this point or that point. Say what you think.
Just regarding the economics again, you've looked at the different resorts and kind of compared what this resort might be like and how it would affect our community. She didn't really address school issues, which is one thing that I guess we're all looking at our schools here in Florence and Lolo and all up and down the Bitterroot Valley, and we're overcrowded already, and we don't have enough money to, to do much with our schools as far as any kind of improvements, and we can't handle a much bigger student load without some sort of influx of cash. Do these types of resorts typically support a school system and help to make it a better system, or do they just create a greater economic drag on the whole?
Well, I think it goes two ways. They don't provide more students, largely because you're looking at out-of-state second homeowners. Obviously, with the housing price and land value impacts, there would be more paid in property taxes. And that would be, a financial advantage to some local school districts.
So most of the jobs that are created are single individuals without children?
Well, I think I haven't really gone into the demographics or the household status of a lot of the job holders at these resorts. Although when you look at some of the studies that have done in Colorado, many of the low-wage workers who don't live near the resorts live in communities where they have children going to school and live in communities where, because of the lack of health insurance and other kinds of job benefits, they require social services. So in those examples, there's actually a burden on those bedroom communities located away from the resort because they're not receiving the benefits in terms of tax revenues, but they're putting up with basically some of the costs that the workers are imposing on the community. I would think for schools closer to the resort, it would be a much better deal in terms of school district proximity to resorts and all that.
At the meeting that was here when McClay was here, and the talk of everybody, concerned about property taxes and so on, I thought McClay had said something about that's one of the things that we'd be considering on the resort end of things is having a resort tax to help not have the local residents incur higher property taxes on the properties that are existing now. Have you done any work to show where that would be the case if you did indeed impose or create a resort tax for his little private enterprise up there?
I haven't. It would be a wonderful world if that were to happen, that a resort tax would actually somehow offset property tax. I am familiar with the mechanics of how property tax systems work, however, and that basically with established mill rates, when the value of your home or your land goes up, the amount you pay goes up. And that's a fact of life. So I don't know how any kind of resort tax would get around that.
Is McClay a native Montanan?
What was the comment?
Question was, is McClay a native Montanan? I think in spades. Very much so.
Well, I don't know, I obviously don't know these individuals personally, but are the people he's working with native Montanans?
Question is, are the people he's working with native Montanans? I just know from what I learned from the website and the occasional press story, the economic consultant researchers from San Francisco, public relations are from Oregon. The guy who's the chief of operations came up from Jackson. So that's all I know just from what I read in the newspaper.
PR guy has a little track record in Montana.
PR guy has roots in Montana.
Question is the comment that I think a lot of you should get a hold of the Sierra magazine from 2003 and read the article about the Vail Resort which now stretches 18 miles down the Alpine Valley, and the destruction that's gone on there, and no matter what Fish and Game said about the links, it was from the guys in Washington, D.C. That goes back to your answer. The only way this can be stopped is by constant pressure all the time, and hopefully the water will not be available for them to make snow. But this article is so depressing when you apply it to us that you're just going to sit and pull your hair out. And the guy has also written a complete book on this. And I know the library has copies of it, so you should go check it out.
Can you cite the magazine?
It's the Sierra Magazine by the Sierra Club. I got it at home. It's year 2003, but I don't know what issue. But when you read it, you'll start sending letters to the Forest Service and Fish and Game and Baucus and Burns and anybody you can think of.
So what's the name of the book?
It's not a book, it's the magazine, the
Okay.
Sierra Magazine.
The library has it.
Sorry that this is your job, but we don't want you.
This question is probably for you two gentlemen. Since logging, making those runs and building roads, probably get equipment up there to cut trees down and probably put facilities up there like a restaurant or restrooms. How would that affect the watershed, which I believe that particular drainage is probably drained into the Bitterroot River, and like the health of that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
That's one of the things that would be analyzed in detail during the environmental impact statement. So, I couldn't say at this point, but that would be one of the issues and one of the things that would be more written about than you probably ever want to read.
I have another question about the wildlife. The elk, specifically the Indian range areas, Tom Clay's property. Given this development, you showed what would happen, but let's assuming let's assuming that in some way the property is developed, either this proposal or eventually down the road somewhere else. What happens to the elk? Does that elk herd cease to exist, or does it move elsewhere?
Well, that's a good question. The question was, what happens to the elk herd if there is development on that property? Does it cease to exist, or does it move elsewhere? Parts of both, actually. It doesn't actually cease to exist. There would still be elk on the property. They would probably be somewhat displaced, although the places they can go to are becoming more and more limited all the time. The overall, kind of getting into analysis here, but I'll go out on a little bit of a limb before we do any in-depth analysis and suggest that there's the strong probability or possibility that the carrying capacity for elk would be reduced.
How would it interact with if they have to go somewhere else? If they move, would they most likely if the lower elevation Forest Service land was still untouched, is that a place they could go, or they need pretty much what they have there, low elevation ranch land?
Low elevation ranch land or that kind of area is real important, especially in severe winters. Now, this is not a severe winter, and consequently elk are distributed up higher on the mountains and much broader than they are during the severe winter. But when we do get a severe winter, then the impacts are that much greater if it's developed, of course.
We've about played out.
I'd like to just have one comment, if you don't mind. And that's, for those of you who didn't attend the meeting that was held, I forget which group it was, but I think Orv Daniels, who is the retired forest supervisor, spoke and got up, and he's one that was instrumental in writing the current Forest Service plan and was the forest supervisor at the time. And one of the things I took away from that meeting that was probably the most important, and the lady that asked the question has already left, but he said that if you really want to make a statement, all you have to do is write and basically tell the Forest Service that you'd like things to stay status quo. All the designations that are there should remain. the plan rules should remain in effect the way they're written now, and you'd like to see that be adopted in the new plan. And if indeed it was, then just by that alone, if the plan's not changed from what it is now, it would be very unlikely that the resort could move forward. And one of the things he also noted at the meeting is that there were a lot of discussions that took place with regards to water rights issues that still have to be clarified. There's the economic feasibility that still has to be overcome to determine whether there's enough skier visits to pay for it, etc. The Fish and Wildlife has their input. The public input, as much negative as it is, wouldn't necessarily harpoon it. So if you really want the message to get through, it's important that you keep on top of writing to not just Fish and Wildlife, the Forest Service, but Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, senators, congressmen, because as he stated in the meeting, you can have all of the hurdles to overcome that you could possibly think of and assume that, well, he's got too many obstacles, there's no way this is going to go. That's when you have to be careful, because that's when it will, because the powers in Washington, D.C. have, they have ears, and when corporations like the big ski corporations have the money behind it, it's very likely that they have more attention to those ears than we do, unless we're, solidified as a group. So, for what that's worth, I took that away from the last meeting.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for coming and really appreciate our speakers. Thank you. You can really help us out if you'll move your chairs over there.